Yeah.
I tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Where we are about to start the colossal task of going over verbs. But what I don't think I'm going to do is I don't think
I'm going to cover verbs from the very beginning. Only because I feel that verbs out of all the parts of speech are usually the ones that are the most most known by those who speak the language as a second language, and I think this is pretty much goes for all language learners. And you should have a lot of background when it comes to verbs. At this point in the level we're at, high school, if you haven't learned verbs yet, then I mean, you might want to go back and find some more elemental material to go over to give you some review. I have provided that. There are a multitude of other videos that I've provided that go over each very specific aspect of verbs and verb tenses, and I think you might want to, go over those. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time going over them here. I'm just going to briefly go over them. So, because there's so many other concepts that we need to deal with that involve verbs, and so we don't have that kind of time. So this whole discussion about verbs, we'll start with the verb itself and pretty much end with shifting verb tense and and everything in between. So we're going to have a few video parts going with this. At any rate, enough talking. Let's get down to business here. Okay, so verbs. We have to start by talking about what is a verb. That's obvious. Okay, now we know every sentence must have a verb. I think we should even know that before we know what a verb is. So that's how essential it is. If you don't have a verb, you don't have a sentence. So, mark that down somewhere. Okay, the three types of verbs. Before we go into what is a verb, I want to talk about the three types of verbs, and then as we go over each type, then we're going to learn more about what the definition of a verb is. We have action verbs, helping verbs, and linking verbs, and action verbs also known as transitive verbs. That's another name for it. These are the three types of verbs that we are going to be discussing. And in our discussion, or after our discussion, we're going to branch off into other grammar concepts, but they all are going to relate back to these three basic forms. Two kinds of action verbs. We're going to start with transitive verbs. Transitive verb, or the action verb definition, is probably the most known definition, and that basically is a verb is a word that shows action. So that is the one that you learn probably first in your youth or your quest to understand verbs. You learn that definition. Okay. Then, of course, as you get older, you learn more about verbs, and you realize that verbs do a lot more than just show action. Another definition that you probably have come in contact with concerning verbs is the definition that really goes with predicate. And the predicate is that thing that tells us something about the subject. So, if your definition is swimming around between those two, then you got a basic idea of what the definition of a verb is. Okay. Okay, so we have transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. In other words, verbs that show action and verbs that don't show action. Let's see the difference between the two. Transitive verbs, of course, we know it's an action verb, but I think probably the most important thing about the transitive verb is it is a verb that has an object that is receiving its action. Okay, so in other words, the action that is being, described by the verb is going to be received by another word, and that word, of course, is going to be called an object. Now, when you have an object receiving the action of a verb, we call that a transitive verb. Yes, for instance, the camera took clear pictures. Of course, took is the verb here. It is an action, and what is receiving the action of took is going to be pictures. That is going to be the object of that transitive verb. Irene baked cookies for the bake sale. Now, baked is going to be the verb. Yes, it is an action. And cookies is going to receive the action of baked. Obviously, you don't want to eat raw cookies, or maybe you do. I don't know, but I don't think you should. Anyway, you look at it. Okay, so this, of course, is an example of transitive verb and their objects. Now, the intransitive verb, however, does not have an object receiving its action. It does not have an object receiving its action. Okay? The hurricane blew, and of course, blew is going to be the intransitive verb over the mainland. Now, how do we know that mainland here is not the object of the transitive verb blew? Probably because we have a preposition here. And in our discussion of prepositions, we learned that every preposition has its object. So mainland is going to be the object of this preposition and not the object of blew. Thus, blew is not going to be a transitive verb here. Okay. Sandy smiled happily. Now here we don't even have a noun anywhere after the verb. So there can't be an object there because there's no noun there. Happily, of course, is a verb giving us more information about smiled. So in this sentence, we don't even have a noun. So there's nothing to even consider as an object. So that would make smiled an intransitive verb. Okay, so now remember when you're going over these concepts, especially when you're going over the very, very basics of the 8 parts of speech, you must keep in mind, especially as a future test taker and even as a writer, you must keep in mind that those things that you think are small details that don't necessarily need to be remembered are probably going to be those things that need to be remembered the most. So we don't want to look at everything as in 2 categories: what I should know and what I shouldn't know. No, when you're learning grammar, you want to assume that you need to know everything, and as you compile grammar concepts, when you get to a point where you can differentiate between what is really important and what is really not important, then you might be able to disregard some things. But when you're initially learning, especially at the 8 parts of speech level, you have to assume that everything that you're learning is relevant and important. Okay, the parts of a verb. Now, in the transitive verbs, of course, because they show action, and whenever you're talking about action, you're talking about meaning, because an action can be performed at different times and in different ways. And in order to communicate the exactness of when an action was performed, you must have different ways to view the word. The word can't be the same in every instance of you explaining when an action happened. So because of that, verbs have different parts. And these parts correlate with when the action is taking place, because this is really important in communication. If you did something yesterday, you don't want to say you did it today, because the person you're talking to, understanding that it was done yesterday, it may be very crucial, that information may be crucial and important to what they're going to do today, so you don't want miscommunication. So this is why the verbs are broken up into different parts. And there are 4 parts of a verb, okay? And they are the base form, the present, the past, and the past participle. Now, these four forms pretty much create all of the verb tenses in the English language. Okay, they're going to be multiplied into 12, not multiplied by 12, but when it's all over, there will be 12 types of tenses, and all 12 originate from these 4, or one of these 4. Okay. Now, the principal parts, of course, of a verb, they are important for the same reason that I just mentioned. When you're talking about tense, you're talking about meaning. And you can't get that meaning confused. When we end down our discussion discussing shift and verb tense, that's a discussion that's going to be solely dealing with meaning and making sure what you're communicating is clear. And this is why, that discussing that grammatical concept, or the error that misusing that concept can create, is going to be very important. But our discussion now about the 4 parts, and of course I'm not going to really get into it, but your understanding of these 4 parts and how they multiply into the 12 tenses and your understanding of what each tense, the meaning of what each tense brings, is going to be really crucial in your understanding that final concept that we're going to be discussing, which is shift and verb tense. Okay, so now, if we want to look at it, if we want to look at it as in some type of formula, when we're talking about extending these 4 parts into 12 tenses, then we're going to be bringing in another verb type, which is the helping verb. Now, I know we haven't discussed it quite yet, but the helping verb, it helps make a word that used to be a verb into a verb again. It also helps create a new verb tense, which helps to create more meaning. Okay, and but it looks pretty much like this: helping verb plus main verb equals verb phrase. And verb phrase is really what I really want to talk about. The verb phrase is those words that create the tense. All the words that create the tense would be considered the verb phrase. And we have to say verb phrase because once we get into more complicated or more meaningful tenses, we have to bring other words into this equation. So the verb goes from being 1 word to 2 words to 3 words and so forth and so on. And in doing that, of course, when you're talking about adding more words, you're talking about creating a phrase. We call it the verb phrase. Now, I know we discussed phrases. I know you probably saying to yourself, now I don't remember talking about one of the 5 types of phrases is a verb phrase. In my opinion, I think it should be like a 6th type of phrase. But it is not, only because you only discuss verb phrases when you're talking about verbs and grammatical concepts that deal with verbs. So, it's not something you can separate and throw into sentence structure because it really wouldn't apply. But it is a type of phrase. So, it is what it is. Let's look at an example of this. They are talking to Sheila about the game. And here we have our verb. And it's not a transitive verb here. We're talking about a helping verb. And I know I'm a bad teacher because I didn't talk about helping verbs before right now. Sorry, but it is a helping verb. But it is helping this word talk that used to be a verb. It's not a verb anymore because I had the ing, another concept that I didn't discuss yet, but we will discuss called the verbal. Bad teacher. Okay, but are talking together happily create a verb phrase, because now it gives us our tense here. And as you can see, helping verb plus main verb, helping verb plus main verb equals verb phrase. Okay, so let's continue. We will, continue this discussion about verbals later, and we're going to get into discussion, but not so much of the verb tenses. Speaking of that, look at this. Did I lie to you? No. Helping verbs. So let's talk about helping verbs since we're there already, since we were discussing the verb phrase. Helping verbs, yes, they help words that used to be verbs become verbs again. Yes. And you know these words without even me going over them. Got Elmer here. And the reason I got Elmer here is because it's so elementary, this discussion. Words like talk, run, walk. I mean, when you want to make them into, say, nouns, you can just add an ing, like running, talking, walking. So, but the problem is that if you want to turn them back into verbs, but you want to keep them in that form, then you have to help them somehow. And the way you help them is you add a helping verb. And here in this sentence, we have using, and in order to make using, do what use used to do when it was a verb, then we need to add the helping verb was. Elmer was using the computer. Making was using, of course, our verb phrase here. All right. Okay, so there are 23 helping verbs. Do you need to know them all? Well, kind of. You do need to know them all. You have the SCORM activity there. Definitely, this is a list that you need to know, so you need to write that list down and familiarize yourself with it. I'm not saying memorize it. I don't want to scare anybody. As soon as you say memorize, people start saying, what, memorize? What you talking about? Well, at least you want to familiarize yourself really good. Now, most of them you're familiar with. I mean, you couldn't have made it through 1st to 6th grade not knowing anything about the helping verbs. That's for sure. So definitely you want to re-familiarize yourself with them. Yes. Okay, now, of course, not every sentence will have a helping verb. We said every sentence must have a verb. Yes. Must have a verb, but not every sentence is going to have a helping verb. For instance, Elmer talked to his mother. Of course, is not in there, doesn't need to be in there. But if you're going to change the meaning by saying Elmer was talking to his mother, then add was. But the sentence was fine without was. So every sentence is definitely not going to have a helping verb. Yes. Now, we mentioned, but we're going to talk about it much later. Not much later, but later. We mentioned it that when you do change the form of a verb by adding something like ing, something that needs a helping verb, then you create a whole other word called a verbal. And verbals definitely need the help of helping verbs. Okay, now... Now, sometimes, there's another word that kind of separates the helping verb from the word that is helping. In other words, sometimes there's a word that you can put right in the middle of the verb phrase, but it doesn't necessarily become a part of the verb phrase. It's just modifying and helping you to understand a little more about the verb that the helping verb is helping. The word that the helping verb is helping. It gives us, in other words, it just gives us more meaning. It's not really adding to the verb phrase, although you can consider it the verb phrase, but it is not adding to it. In the technical sense, in the meaningful sense, it is adding meaning. For instance, we have could find is our verb phrase here. The boy could not find his socks. Now, of course, we can remove not if we want to, make it into the positive. The boy could find his socks, but here, of course, it's in the negative. The boy could not find his socks. So, not being an adverb is put right in the middle of this verb phrase to add more meaning to the verb. but it's not necessarily a part of the verb phrase. I know that sounds a bit complicated, but it's not really. In other words, it's in the verb phrase. So I can get you to understand that. But, of course, we have many of these situations where we put words within the verb phrase to add more meaning to the verb phrase, and the verbs being used in that phrase. Yes. More about helping verbs here. Believe it or not, you can have a whole lot of helping verbs to help one word. You can have up to 3 helping verbs. And I know it may sound crazy because here we're talking about a 4-verb phrase, but it can happen. For instance, the dog must have been chasing. Now here we have a 4-word verb phrase, and all 4 of these words are just dealing with the verb. Just giving us information about the verb. It's telling us everything we need to know about that action and what that action is doing and how and when that action is happening, and this is really important when we're trying to pinpoint, when we're trying to specify, what's going on with the subject. When we're trying to make it as specific as possible so that the person we're communicating with will understand exactly what's going on, that's when we bring a bunch of helping verbs in to help clarify certain things. The dog must have been chasing the cat. I mean, if you come in the house and the house is torn apart, and the cat and the dog is in the house, then, when you're trying to communicate what you think happened to someone, then to imply that you think it's the dog, it was the dog and the cat, and that's because they were the only ones in the house, then you, to really bring your point home, you would tell the person the dog must have been chasing the cat. I mean, that's the only solution to it. So these helping verbs really help to clarify meaning here, and that's really what their intention is, to help clarify meaning and to pinpoint the tense and when the action took place. Okay, now we also have another type of helping verb, and you know what? That's not another type of helping verb. That's just more the same. We're just going to keep on going here. We are not going to go over that. We're not going to go over that. If you have the SCORM activity, you can. But like I said from the beginning, I don't want to keep covering the same things over and over again. Okay, so let's see how it looks. If we're looking at some type of chart here, the base form, the present participle, the present, the past, and the past participle. If we're looking at them like this, with just regular verbs, they look like this. I think this is something that you definitely already know. Let's just go over one. Base form of claim is going to be claim. That's the base verb. If you want to make it like present participle, of course it's going to be claiming. Past is going to be claimed. And of course past participle is going to be have claimed. And, so forth and so on. You can go with SCORM activity and take a closer look at that if you would like. The ones I really want to get to are the irregular verbs, and we're gonna just make that a whole nother part of our video series here and stop here. That was our basic introduction to verbs. I know I didn't really go into a whole lot of detail. This is why I have an array of videos there for you to take a look at, because I really don't want to get that basic. Our next part is a little less basic, but I'm not going to spend that much time on it either. I'm really trying to get to the grammar concepts that really count in our level.
Yes, then that's beautiful.
In Islamic school.
I'll talk about tomorrow.
That's rolling the hard way. We don't want to roll quite that hard. We want to get one of them little minibuses.
Welcome to the newtimeflash.com. Welcome to the newtimeflash.com.
Oh, yeah. All right. Check this out.
asking any one of you to take this leap if I did not have complete faith in your ability to succeed. Your courage will never be more needed than it is today.
I tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.